Sometimes you spend a while thinking about how to play a game you love in a brand new and exciting way. Well, after beating Hollow Knight using one hand and spending another playthrough with everything upside down, I wanted to return to some basics. I looked at everything Hollow Knight had to offer and realized I'd never even used the nail arts through any of the runs of my game. This is because I have the ultimate cucumber mail strategy of using my face to take any damage enemies deal to me, while simultaneously smacking the very same enemies hoping that they die first. Before I delve into this run, let me quickly explain what nail arts are. Across Hyla Nest exist 4 nail masters who will teach our player character, called the Knight, special moves that have some unique animations, styles of attack, and an increased amount of damage. The Knight can learn 3 nail arts from these masters: Great Slash, Dash Slash, and Cyclone Slash. Unfortunately, the Knight doesn't start off with the nail arts at the beginning of the game, and as far as I'm aware, you can't unlock any of them without killing at least one boss. To work around this issue, I used a save editor to immediately unlock the 3 nail arts. I did want to just start with the Great Slash, but the save editor is super confusing, and I made a bigger effort to just use the Great Slash instead. Anyway, with the foundations of the run explained and laid out, I was ready to embark on weirdly the most challenging challenge run I've attempted so far. See, I initially thought this run would be easy compared to the one-handed attempt I performed, but I greatly over and underestimated what the nail arts can do. Walking through King's Pass was a complete breeze, as all I had to do was charge up my attack and one-hit every single enemy on my way through. Much like the sea monkeys I had as a child, these bugs didn't have a hope in hell of surviving a week at most. Breaking open a huge barrier, I made my way to Dirtmouth, where I kept a 2-meter distance from Elderbug, mainly due to his stance on Kingdom Hearts. I recently found out he actually enjoys the franchise and the storytelling it provided. Someone like that is either a liar or an idiot, and I didn't intend on sticking around to find out which one he was. The first objective of this run was to take down the False Knight, whose special ability was being huge. This big dummy held the city crest and refused to share it with me, even though it knew I needed it to gain access to the City of Tears further into the run. After unsuccessfully trying to trade some Doritos flavored Mountain Dew with it, I had to kill it, which I did with ease by holding down the X button when my Great Slash attack was charged up. From here I ventured west, where I met Gary from SpongeBob, who kindly taught me a spell I had zero interest in using. This is a nail art only challenge. Why on earth would I need a spell, I thought to myself. It was then that I'd realized I made a huge mistake in entering this area. The first was that I couldn't kill the boulder at the end of this snail sex dungeon using just my nail arts, as the reach of the weapon just wasn't quite there. The second mistake was realizing I couldn't leave this area, as I would just spawn at the start where I was initially locked in. Despite all my efforts, there was no way past this without using spells, so I made a new rule on the spot. If I can't make it past an area without using a spell, then I can use it for the sole purpose of overcoming the obstacle. So instead, I charged up my nail art attacks and built up my soul by killing the baby boulders ejaculated by the mama boulder. What do you mean I can't use the word ejaculated? No, I know it has that meaning, but I'm using it the other way. After failing the challenge, not even 30 minutes into the run, I continued on knowing that this challenge would still be interesting because of several bosses down the line. Proceeding on to Green Path, I met the same issue with a second boulder that was just as pretty as Chat's mum. It was here that I had the bright idea of thinking that taking advantage of a charm called Long Nail, that, you guessed it, makes the nail long and increases the range of attack, would work against the boulder. Sadly, this charm is sold by Salubra and requires the dash ability in order to gain access to her, which is hidden behind the boulder in our way currently. I was then informed of a trick that we could use called Shade Skip to pogo up to Salubra, but tricks are for kids and I'm a man. Regardless of all this, we collectively found out that Long Nail and its cuter brother, Mark of Pride, don't actually affect the nail arts, so it would have been a complete waste of time to do it anyway. After failing the challenge a second time by using spells to kill Chat's mum, I entered Green Path. I happily frolicked through this colourful area without a care in the world, until I realized I wouldn't be able to do my joyous pogo to skip a whole bunch of Green Path. As I was only able to use nail arts, it meant that I couldn't bounce off the stupid mosquito and had to venture around Green Path like a dirty casual player. Disgusted with myself on the route I have to take, I skulked through as fast as I could, encountering and ignoring Zote because he reminds me of me, and me as a loser. Leaving Zote to be a not so delicious meal for the giant Vengefly, I finally found where Hornet was hanging out. I then made fun of her hair? Helmet? Is that a mask? I don't know. Anyway, whatever I said about her, she clearly didn't like, and I made her run away and cry. A fashionable looking corpse who I can only guess wasn't as good as me at hurting Hornet's feelings collapsed on the ground. As chief of the fashion police, I had to remind the corpse that cloaks still weren't in, and to stop trying to make them a thing. I confiscated the cloak, which granted me the ability to dash around. With a new power unlocked, feeling very happy with myself, I found myself short on cash, and I knew just the place I could rob. I mean, conduct a run-of-the-mill civil asset forfeiture procedure. Entering the domain of the Mantis people who kept themselves cut off from the rest of society, I immediately sought out the so-called lords in order to detain them for tax fraud, insurance fraud, money laundering, racketeering, whatever that is. Before I could minority report these criminals, I had to make my way through to the depths of the fungal wastes to where they resided. The underbelly of criminals attempted to stop me at every single interval. I mean, look at this green dude hiding in the floor. He clearly farted out that explosive thing just as I was looking to hop over it. and not because I'm incredibly unobservant. After disposing of so many of these mantises, I arrived at an area above the Mantis Lord's den, the entry of which was firmly locked. I found a couple of levers hidden around this room along with the mantis claws, which let me cling to walls like perfectly cooked spaghetti. Finally, I was able to descend into their domain. I asked them very nicely to get down from their thrones, which they happily obliged to do. I was actually worried that this fight would be pretty difficult, on account of the second phase having 2 enemies to fight at once, forcing me to time my attacks perfectly or to find suitable opportunities to get great slash hits in. Fortunately for me, the Lords may as well have called themselves Microsoft because they had so many windows of attack, and I defeated them pretty quickly. With the Lord's spirit broken and a fat stack of cash sitting in my pocket, I was ready to go shopping in the City of Tears, spending my first 250 geo to hone my nail and increase my nail damage output. In order to increase the level of skill I have in this game, I had to look at some expensive Australian cordial my friend had purchased. Sadly, she didn't let me have any because I was being ridiculous, and that I couldn't respect a $30 bottle of cordial, and that Australia is too far away from the UK. After blocking my friend on all social media, I made my way up to the Soul Sanctum to unlock a neat little spell that will let me break through crumbly floor and let me fail the run for the 3rd time. I wandered through the area, taking down the Soul Twister enemies with ease. It was then that I started to question why I didn't use nail arts more often, considering how often these mobs that shoot lock-on spells gave me such a hard time in other runs. And that was when I confirmed that I was in fact a big dummy and realized I had forgotten I'd cheated the nail arts in. Making short work of the enemies in the Soul Sanctum, I found the dude that held on to Desolate Dive, the spell I needed for accessing some areas later in the game. As I was fighting this guy, I looked at its player model and wondered how it would wear pants. Do you think the Soul Master would have 4 leg slots, or would it pair the legs together and wear normal jeans like the rest of us? Keeping the pants up would be another problem for this guy with his returnness being unable to wear a belt. I then realized that suspenders could be an option, as he could use the area between his horns as anchors. I digress, this guy was still pretty easy. The only issue was the second phase where I couldn't get enough damage in. He repeated his slamming down and heat-seeking missile spell attacks, which can be tricky, but thankfully the Soul Master went down as much as his pants would if he wore them. In order to make my way out of Soul Sanctum, I had to leave through a different way as I couldn't go back up the way I came in, thanks to the Soul Master smashing us through the arena. Because of this, I did end up killing a couple of floating mistakes and therefore failing the challenge a 3rd time, but all the same I carried on with the goal of beating the game using just nail arts and the occasional unavoidable spell kill. To make up for it though, I got to imitate the biblical story of Moses parting the Red Sea using a Beyblade. Yeah, you heard me. That really happened in the Beyblade show and in real life.
Since ancient times, the existence of bays can be found in moments throughout history. The power of Beyblades have been used to change the course of rivers and oceans. They have been used to defeat many armies and create huge empires.
The next port of call on my list of objectives was to obtain the Crystal Dash so I could traverse through areas faster and get access to Yzma's Tear for the Umu boss fight later on. This area was pretty weird to get through because I didn't really seek out to kill many of the enemies in the peak. I just wanted to get past them, mainly because the thing I kill most in here are the Crystal Aspids, and they're quite fond of floating above spikes that are surprisingly sharp and, dare I say, spiky. So I elected to avoid engaging with the Aspids as much as I could, which went fine apart from one segment where I managed to somehow get lost, and 2 of the wieners bullied me into a corner, surrounding me in spikes and forcing me to die at their mercy. With an embarrassing death aside, I navigated the spiked, flipping, floating floors of fragility, and this lazy loser lounging on a bench, and I ripped the crystal heart out of the giant golem and unlocked the Crystal Dash. From here I had to do some general tasks to upgrade my weapon, get a couple of mask shards, kill the dung defender, fight several waves of enemies guarding Yzma, and finally making the loser tree cry to steal one of the tears to gain poison immunity. The first chapter of this video I had one final item to unlock, the Monarch Wings. It's just fancy talk for double jump. The wings were hidden in a room behind a failed knight called the Broken Vessel, tucked away in the pits of Hallownest. But while I show my journey to unlocking the final item, I'm going to talk about how incredibly weird it is that double jump is a standard thing in video games. Hell, even jumping is weird when you think about it. How many people play video games that involve a lot of walking and will instead just spam jump to each destination? I mean, for starters, I'm guilty of doing this in Hollow Knight, but I know all of you do the silly jumping in GTA. Don't even try to lie. But double jumping is its whole other weird world of mechanics. Imagine some devs sitting there racking their brains trying to think of something that was better than just jumping, and eventually coming up with double jumps. I mean, sometimes it makes sense, like in Mario games where you can ride Yoshi, or in Banjo-Kazooie where it's like a weird hover, but every single Smash Bros character can double jump, and some have little explanation of why they can do that. Anyway, double jump is weird, Broken Vessel's dead, and I now have the ability to double jump. Now we can actually begin the real juicy part of this challenge, which which is taking down the 3 Dreamers, getting mildly sidetracked, and finally defeating the Hollow Knight. Before I could take down the Dreamers who kept the barrier to the Hollow Knight sealed, I had to obtain an item called the Dream Nail, which is an elegant way of disguising what the Knight actually does to the sleeping Dreamers. And if you ever watched that TV show Heroes, you remember when Sylar catches Claire and keeps her conscious while he steals her immortality power, but her brains are all exposed and shit? Yeah, it's the exact same process in this game. Thankfully, to save us all some time in this segment, you can actually skip through all the dialogue and rush a weird platforming section, pick up the Dream Nail from the moth, and then get on with playing the game. With the Dream Nail in Dream Hand, I got to dream kill the first of the 3 Dreamers, Lurien, the Watcher. The Watcher Knights were closest to me, so I went for them first. The Knights were next door in a spire in the City of Tears. Unfortunately for me, the Knights were something I had greatly underestimated. Naive little Chemical Packer went into this fight without a care in the world. So whimsical and joyful was he. They didn't account for the very few opportunities of attack the little streamer had on top of the painful ganging up the Watcher Knights performed on him, and being blissfully unaware of these turds having a longer melee reach than he did with his nail arts led to a very tough experience. Death after death after death after death after death. I relented and went off to find a better method to deal with this boss blocking me from smashing open Lurien's skull. Here I had the bright idea of getting an ability that is tucked away in the abyss. The Shade Cloak allows the wielder to dash through enemies without taking any damage. What a great idea, I thought to myself, it would be to go and obtain this little item. But naive and stupid Chemical Packer forgot about the even more difficult boss stopping him from getting the key to unlock the gate to the abyss. You remember when we fought Hornet in Greenpath at the very beginning of the game? Well, this time she's back, and with a little more fight in her than the first encounter. Hornet 2 Electric Boogaloo was a disastrous battle for me. This spider-looking thing with a fork and spoon combo for a head beat me down over and over again, constantly humiliating and degrading my ability to play this game. I fell back, came up with a new plan to take down Hornet, which failed, and decided to go take out my anger on the other Dreamers in the hope that maybe, just maybe, it'll intimidate the Watcher Knights into playing fairly. Mono1 was the next Dreamer, kept in a vat of special juice and guarded by SpongeBob's nemesis, Umu, who was annoyingly tucked away in a subsection of the fungal waste called the Fog Canyon. I say annoyingly because it's a job and a half to get to Umu without hitting so much exploding stuff. There's these obnoxiously small bubbles laying around that do double mouse damage, and the giant jellyfish just lounging around with their questionable hitboxes. That's not even the worst part of this portion of the game. Umu exists, and there's simply no redeemable qualities about Umu. Seriously, if Umu was Jesus, and I was one of those wise men, I wouldn't have gifted him myrrh, I would have gifted him murder. And what do you know? I did. This jellyfish took its sweet ass time to let me attack it, giving me electric shocks like any shelf I touch in a grocery store. Seriously, why do I get a shock every time I touch one? It makes no sense. Nevertheless, Umu's dead, and I'm a little happier with that fact. Now let me mention, Quirrell isn't innocent in this whole affair, taking his sweet ass time to weaken Umu so I can actually attack him. I decided to punish Quirrell just as much as I punished Umu, by making him watch me crack open his teacher's head Midsummer style. 1 Dreamer down, 2 to go. Hera was next on my list of Dreamers that I need to kill in order to beat the Hollow Knight, and therefore the challenge as well, or Lodtin Tiok Kat Core for short. For most of us first and repeat playthrough people, Deep Nest was an exceptionally rough area to navigate, what with the tremendous and distracting noise produced by the Garpedes. Here, I'll play the Garpede noise and keep talking and see if you can understand what I'm saying. Aside from the Garpedes, this whole area is a maze, a creepy maze, with enemies appearing out of thin air, floors that collapse to reveal a sudden spike pit, and of course the sash bringing trash thingy, crash thingy, the flash spreading, the crash thingy, the hash slinging slasher. While I think the speedrunners that claim to know the exact and fastest route through Deep Nest are liars, I do believe you can get a general correct feel on which paths to take to get there as fast as possible. If you find Nosk, you've gone the wrong way. If you're doing this weird jumping puzzle, then you've gotten lost. If you're fighting Absolute Radiance, then I don't know what the hell you've done, but if you manage to find a nice pit to fall down into a spring, then you're well on your way to the Spider Dreamer. Heading further west to the very edge of Deep Nest, I found a large open room, and at the very top was a house that I entered into without knocking. After being asked to leave, I instead chose to climb their walls like a deranged and quite frankly, rude Spider-Man, into a crawl space, which was only a couple of jumps away from the slumbering spider set upon a seat of stone. Cracking open her skull like 1,000 rubber bands around a watermelon, I slayed the floating beast, charging it with great slash after great slash until her seal was broken on the temple. Now with 2 Dreamers down and news spreading quick about my successes, I was hopeful in believing I'd weakened the morale of the Watcher Knights enough that I could beat them with ease. Well, I was wrong. After an hour of trying to fight these wretches, I resorted to gathering up some more pale ore to increase my nail damage. My first source of one was regrettably back at the peak of Crystal Peak, the Crystal Peak if you will. Reaching the very edge of this area was a pale ore just sitting there waiting for me to pick it up, which I happily did. Sadly I required more ore, and knowing that one was unlocked by gaining 600 essence, I sought out various bosses that gave me that amount. Up first and arguably the most difficult, most widely feared in the Hollow Knight community, was the almighty, all-knowing, all-powerful Gorb. This boss shoots out spikes and does a whole bunch of other crazy frightening stuff like float there menacingly. By the skin of my teeth, I rid the world of Gorb and took the 100 essence from him. Up next was Zero in the graveyard area close to the Seer. This fight was pretty easy and I managed to turn Zero into -1. Get it? Cause Zero sounds like zero, and if you took zero away, then it'd be like -1, you know what I mean? You know what, forget it. Elderhu was the next enemy to take down. I always joke about how easy this boss is and what a waste of time it is to fight in the Pantheons. But without the Shade Cloak ability, Hu is actually pretty hard. After a solid 30 minutes of dying to these crushing pillars getting me every single time, I turned Elderhu into Elder Waz. 303 essence in hand with 600 minus 303 more to go. You do the maths, I don't want to. I decided to take a detour to kill the Brooding Morlek for some reason. Not sure why I did that, but in that time I was told that I only required 300 essence from the Pale Ore from the Seer. So I beelined my way over to that stupid moth, got the Pale Ore, met the Nailsmith, fired out 2000 Geo I needed to get my nail upgraded and returned to battle the Watch Knights one final time. After getting beat down for what felt like a solid 40 minutes, I called it a day and ended the stream, figuring a break was all I needed. To my surprise, it was exactly everything I needed. Literally the second fight of the stream, I took down the Knights without a sweat, and got to ride a pretty long elevator to where the final dreamer lay. Recreating that banquet scene in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom where they eat the monkey brains, I gained access to Lurien's mind and its innermost secrets, which was just that they preferred Burger King over other fast food establishments, but I can definitely understand why they took that secret to the grave. Finally, all that stood between me and the Hollow Knight was, well, nothing now. I walked up to Elderbug, gestured for him to come closer towards me, and that I was going to whisper into his ear. Then as he descended and put his ear next to my mouth, I shouted really loud. I descended to the Black Egg Temple, home of the Hollow Knight and 3 of the 5 members of NSYNC. After the debacle that was the entire odyssey of the Watch Knights, I led myself into the belief that this fight was going to be pretty easy in comparison, which of course it wasn't. The final obstacle between me and successfully failing this challenge was an incredibly fast boss, who gave me very few opportunities to get some great slashes in, and who had a range greater than my get in, charge a nail art up, and dash away before he hit me method of attack. The guy had a nifty little practical jokey play on me occasionally, where once I charged up my attack, and just as I was ready to unleash some damage on the boss, he'd get into a parry stance and do some fat damage upon my idiot face. After a solid 20 minutes of getting my ass beat, I finally figured out the trick to beating the Hollow Knight, which was to stop being a big dummy and wait for the times where I can attack. Learning that maybe I shouldn't try and hit the Great Beast while it's swinging its massive sword wasn't the greatest and best idea, and to instead wait for the attack sequence to finish before I perform my own great slashes was the best technique. Phase 2 was less of a problem for me, as the Hollow Knight had some pretty large periods of vulnerability, like when he's shooting orange juice like a joyful dolphin, or whenever he's doing whatever this is. I was successful in bringing this formidable enemy into a limping state of weakness, where I performed the most gleeful Cyclone Slash, spinning my blade into his face over and over again until the Hollow Knight was hollow smited. Drinking in all the orange gas spewing out of the Guardian, I was able to beat Hollow Knight using just nail arts, apart from those 3 times where I killed stuff with magic, but who's counting, right? That's all I have for this video. If you liked what you saw, be sure to like and subscribe to any and every MLM and pyramid scheme that you know of. Even if you know it's a scam, just go ahead and put all your money into them. I'm Chemical Packer. Thank you very much for watching.